RISC OS is an operating system that will be instantly familiar to anyone who went to school in the UK back in the late 80s to mid 1990s, and it was actually the built-in operating system on the standard school computers of the day, the Acorn Archimedes. And back then it was actually the first GUI-based operating system that I ever used. And RISC OS was a real revolution in its day. First released in 1987, originally under the name Arthur, it was designed for Acorn's new ARM chipset, which originally stood for Acorn RISC Machine, and of course today powers everything from your mobile phone, your tablet, and even Apple's new M1 Max. And its user interface had many forward-thinking and quite intuitive designs that we don't see in modern operating systems. Now, Acorn included RISC OS with all of their ARM-based machines until the cancelled Phoebe computer that was due to be released in 1998, but got cancelled at the last minute when the company had to refocus the following year and changed their name from Acorn to Element 14, and essentially abandoned all of their computer development, distanced itself from the education market, and instead focused on set-top boxes and IPTV services, before being acquired by Broadcom in late 2000. With, for all intents and purposes, ARM Holdings taking over its parent company's operations and the rest of the company's assets being sold off to various different parties. Now, it is a complicated path to follow, and this isn't supposed to be an Acorn history video, but I thought that was quite interesting to explore. The operating system itself has survived though, and again, it is a bit of a complicated path, with two separate forks of RISC OS being developed after the demise of Acorn. A company called RISC OS Limited licensed the rights from Element 14 and continued development, and the rights were then sold to Castle Technology, who developed their own fork of the operating system before they came together and were released as an open source project in 2018. So the history is pretty messy and complicated, but really all you need to know is RISC OS lives on today. And it can actually run on various platforms, including the Raspberry Pi, of course being ARM-based, and essentially, the Raspberry Pi is a modern-day Acorn Archimedes, so really, it is the natural platform for the operating system to live on. And for this video, we're going to use the latest Raspberry Pi 400, and I love this machine. Being an all-in-one design, it is very reminiscent of the Acorn Archimedes, and on here, we can check out the latest version, which is a modern evolution of the very first OS for ARM processors. And it has been quite a few years since I last gave RISC OS a proper test drive. In fact, my last video on it was back in 2013, which scarily was almost a decade ago now, when I tested it out on the then new Raspberry Pi 2. So today I'm going to be installing the latest version on the current Raspberry Pi 400, giving it a test drive, checking out what's new in the latest versions, and even trying to get some classic Acorn Archimedes and BBC Micro apps and games running. And installing RISC OS on your Raspberry Pi is actually really straightforward. You'll need a blank SD card, either a brand new one or one that you've formatted, and I tend to use the official SD card formatter tool just to be sure that you're getting the full capacity of your card. And you could actually just download the Raspberry Pi Imager software from the Raspberry Pi website, and you will see that RISC OS 5 is one of the standard options in the installer. But there is another more fully featured version of RISC OS available for the Pi called RiscOS Direct. And this distribution comes with a load of pre-installed software, games, emulators, so instead I'm going to be running this version. Now the process is slightly more manual, but I'll put all the links in the video description, and if you go onto their website, you will see there is actually a pre-made disk image for the Raspberry Pi 400 available for download. So we'll grab this off the Google Drive link, and then I'm going to write the image to the SD card using Etcher. Now you probably could just use Disk Utility on the Mac, but Etcher is also available on Windows, Mac Linux, so I'll show it this way for the video. And then 5 minutes later, when the card is written and verified, we can take it out and put it over into the Raspberry Pi. And I've got the Pi 400 hooked up to this Samsung monitor via HDMI, got a mouse connected, the power supply, and I've plugged in an Ethernet cable, as I don't believe that RISC OS currently supports Wi-Fi on the Pi, but that should be all we need to get going. And before we start, there is one thing to note. You will actually need a 3-button mouse to use RISC OS. Now, this is not a problem for most people, as the scroll wheel clicks in to be the 3rd button on most modern USB mice, including the official Raspberry Pi mouse. But RISC OS does rely pretty heavily on the middle mouse button. So then I'll put the SD card into the Pi, power it on, and as you'll see, the boot time is very fast, and we will see the RISC OS Direct Desktop for the very first time. And just before we jump into that, I wanted to take a quick moment to give a big thank you to this video sponsor, my wonderful friends at Blinkist. Now, obviously, we're all busy. You know, I've got 2 day jobs, got a family, a podcast, my YouTube channel, my retro computing hobby. And if you're like me, you've got a busy life, Blinkist is perfect for us. Now, it's a tool to widen and progress your knowledge and put you in touch with your passions in life by allowing you to read top non-fiction books by pulling out just the key messages, the important stuff that's in there, and putting them into 50-minute text and audio explainers that they call blinks. And they've already got over 4,500 titles, and they do something called shortcasts, which are blinks for podcasts. And of course, privacy is a huge concern for lots of us who are using technology today. And I've been checking out a title called Privacy is Power. And this really is a shocking expose on how our privacy and personal data is being collected by corporations, governments, and even criminal organizations, and how they actually influence our behavior and what you can do to protect yourself. And I'm also on a bit of a self-improvement tip right now as well. And they've got loads of great reads, including Thinking Fast and Slow by Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, that explores how our decisions are made and why certain judgment errors are really common and how we can improve ourselves. So Blinkist helps you learn and consume more in less time, and it can even help you discover your next favorite book or podcast, and you can use it on your phone, tablet, or your desktop or laptop. And I want you to check out Blinkist today, so I've got you a great offer, a 7-day free trial and 25% off a premium membership if you use my link at blinkist.com/danwood that I'll link up in this video's description. And of course, you'll be really helping out the channel by showing some love to our sponsors, so a big thank you to Blinkist for their support of my channel. And the first thing we'll see is the RISC OS Desktop, or as it's known in RISC OS, the pin board, which is this area here, where you will see all of these icons left out on the pin board, and where you will open your applications and do your file manipulation, all of that in this area here, the pin board. And then we have the icon bar along the bottom of the screen here. Now, I did mention before that RISC OS has some concepts that are quite alien to users of modern operating systems. As you've got to remember, you know, this came out originally back in 1987, and back then, the standards for user interfaces weren't really decided on, and, you know, they were still kind of making it up as they went along. But it is quite useful that the RISC OS Direct team have put on the default wallpaper a handy little cheat sheet here that shows you a few of the keys that are mapped to different keys on the Raspberry Pi keyboard. And also it shows you what the mouse buttons do as well. Now, I mentioned before that the middle mouse button is essential to the operation of RISC OS, as really the middle button is the equivalent of a right click in most other operating systems. So if I press in the scroll wheel on my mouse, you will see that a context menu appears. And that is how you access menus on all of your applications throughout RISC OS. If I do a right click, you'll just see this rubber band here to select things on the desktop. So same with the left mouse click. So left button is select, right is adjust, and the menus are the middle scroll wheel. So you really will need a 3-button mouse to use anything in RISC OS. And looking down here in the icon bar, you'll see that we've got the Raspberry Pi logo here in the corner. On the original RISC OS, I remember that being the Archimedes logo, and then later it was the Acorn logo. And this is actually defined by the theme that you set in RISC OS, so I'll get into that in a bit more detail soon. But if we click on this, this is something I always liked in RISC OS, the fact that you can actually manually allocate resources to different system tasks and things that are running. So if we look down here, for example, you can see there is a RAM disk there. And the ones that are red, you can actually just click on and change their values. So we can actually define how big the RAM disk is and how much RAM it will use. So if I put that down to 0, you'll see the RAM disk will disappear. Then I can put it back up again and it will come back. We can actually set how much RAM we want to allocate to the RAM disk. Now, obviously today, I mean, this is using, this Raspberry Pi's got 4 gigabytes and we can access 2 gigabytes of it in here by the looks of things. Not as essential as it used to be when you had a 1 megabyte Acorn Archimedes 3000 and you needed every single byte to run those demanding games. But it is quite cool that actually the user has full control over what different system tasks are using in terms of system resources. So I always did like that about RISC OS, and you can kind of, you know, deep dive into all the settings here as well. So that's very cool. Next to it, we have a monitor icon. Now, what I'm going to do here actually is downgrade the screen resolution, because in my videos, when I record them at 1080p, I always get a load of comments of people going, I'm trying to watch it on my phone and I can't really see what's going on. So if we click on there, you can see that I can actually change the screen resolution to something a bit more visible. We'll do 1280 by 720 and accept that. And hopefully things are a bit more visible now if you're watching on mobile. Next to it, this is something that I think the RiscOS Direct team have installed with their distribution. I don't remember this being as standard on RiscOS, but it is a little calendar widget that if you click on it, it brings up a full-blown organizer, kind of like an old school Filofax. So you've got your calendar in there. You can put your things that are coming up, your diary events in there, anniversaries, if you want to remember your other half's birthday and your wedding anniversary. You can keep all your addresses in here too, and any notes that you want to put in, you can just add into this section here. And even though this looks very old school, I mean, one thing that you find with a lot of old programs is they cut off at a certain date and stop working anymore. But as you can see here, in 2021, everything is still accessible in here. And we have a few different icons here along the top. That was quite interesting. A phone, what's that do? Maybe we can do voice calls if we've got a voice modem or something in here. Yeah, not too sure what that does. So yeah, it's cool to have that included though. And actually, as we get a bit more into this, you'll see that the RiscOS Direct team have actually put a load of third-party applications in here that will help you with your day-to-day running if you want to use RiscOS every day. They've actually left out a load of programs here on the pin board that we'll look at in a bit more detail in a sec. But if you look at the other side of the icon bar here, this is where our storage lives. So that just shows you the resources, nothing really much in there. Then we've got my USB stick here. So if I click that, I can access everything that's on this USB stick. A standard FAT32 formatted 32 gig USB stick, and you can. It makes it really useful to to transfer programs from other systems over to the Raspberry Pi. As from what I remember with RiscOS, web surfing is quite limited. So there may be certain websites where you want to download games and programs that might not work on here, but you can do it on your modern Windows or Mac machine and just move them over. Next to it, we have the internal SD card with a load of programs that are installed in the RiscOS Direct distribution. The apps directory, now this is from the original RiscOS on the Acorn Archimedes with a few extra programs in here. I do remember on the original Archimedes machines, these programs were in ROM, I believe. So I remember at school using things like this draw program here, that actually if I double click it, you'll notice that the window didn't instantly open. Instead, it appears down here on the right of the icon bar, and then you need to click it again to open the program. So again, another alien user interface concept if you're used to Windows or Mac OS today. And this is quite a basic vector drawing package. And I remember, messing around with this in IT classes at school back in the day. And it doesn't look like it's changed much at all, actually. We can actually check out the information on this. We'll go to info here. Yeah, there you go. Author Acorn Computers 1993, although it is version 1.41 from April last year. So maybe it's been updated, but the fact that they actually attribute this to Acorn 1993, maybe it's unchanged. It looks very similar, I've got to admit. Then we'll discard that. And we've also got Edit. I remember, writing documents in that at school as well. A very simple kind of text editor. Yeah, and the font actually looks like the old school Acorn Archimedes system font in here as well, which I think we can change. Yeah, there's quite a lot of different fonts included here. Yes, the system font that was. Yeah, the old school font that you got on the Archimedes back in the day. We'll change that to, maybe something more modern. There you go. Looks a bit nicer for modern displays. And then if you want to save this, again, this is something that is very different in RiscOS to most operating systems. If I wanted to save this document here, we'll put it in the RAM disk for now. Obviously, anything that you put in the RAM disk is going to be lost when you reboot the machine. But, for temporary storage, and I'm hardly losing a novel if I delete this file, it is quite useful. So what we do to save it is, again, we middle click to get the menu. We go to save here, and as you can see, it'll bring up an icon. We can give it a name. And then on most operating systems, you would get a file save dialog box where you'd have to go through and manually navigate into the area of your storage where you wanted to save the file. In RiscOS, though, what you do is, because we've already got it open there, you literally just drag and drop it into the area of your storage that you want to save it. And it is that simple. And actually, I do really like that because the amount of times I've got a directory open on my Windows desktop, and then I want to save a file in it, but instead I've got to click on save and I've got to manually find that location again. When it's already open in the next window, it would be nice just to drag and drop it over. So actually, that is a really nice function in RiscOS. Also in here, we have the help application, you will notice that everything, all of the apps in RiscOS have an exclamation mark before them. That is how you signify that it is a program. So if I double click on this, this is quite cool. Now, as you can see, if I hover over an icon, we will get some information about what we can do with it. So that appears down there in the bottom right. And then if you hover over anything, you will get some useful information on what the program is, maybe some useful tips on what you can do with it and what the mouse buttons do. There you go, click select to display the route. So if you ever get lost in RiscOS, it is quite good for holding your hand and giving you some information to help you out. So that's quite cool to have. We'll quit that. And one thing you'll find with RiscOS Direct is that it is heavily orientated around programming. Now, that does make sense because, you know, back in the day with the Acorn BBC Micro and the Archimedes being these standard school computers, there was a massive ecosystem of programming tools around them. So if I look here on the pinboard, we have a programming directory. If I double click on that, there are loads of different interpreters and compilers for lots of different languages. We've got C there, PHP, Python as well. And I must admit my programming days are well behind me now. You know, I've forgotten everything I learned back in the day. But actually on these niche platforms like RiscOS, it is really good because you can get famous in these communities by programming an application or a game or something that's missing from the platform. And pretty much everyone that uses it is going to download it because, you know, they want new software. So it is a good way to get into development and kind of sharpen up your skills by developing on niche platforms like this. And also we have the legendary BBC Basic included too. So if I double click that, you will see that we land into what looks like a BBC Micro. And it says there, this is BBC Basic version 5, copyright Acorn 1989. And BBC Basic was generally regarded as the best BASIC on any of the 8-bit machines back in the 80s. You could even put like inline machine code in your BASIC programs as well. And any of those old magazines that you've got with type-in listings, chances are they probably will work just fine in here as well, unless they do anything funky with, you know, BBC hardware. But it is great to have this built in. And, you know, I remember just doing the old program in BASIC that we often did in shops back in the day. When I went in Tandy, you'd always leave this on. And then leave the shop and leave it running on their machines. Very childish, but yeah, still makes me laugh. And then to get out of here, we just type in quit, and it will take me back to the RiscOS pinboard. And now let's check out a few more of the included applications with RiscOS Direct. So if I go to the SD card, you'll see there is actually quite a big selection of different categories in here. So if we go to AudioVideo, apps is the same as the one that's left out on the pinboard there. You'll see there are various media players in here. So if I go to AM player, that I think is like a Winamp clone. Yes, as you can see there, it looks very similar to Winamp. And they actually do include some media files as well, so you can give all of these programs a test drive. If we go into here, there are a few songs in here that I hope are copyright free. So we'll click play on there and you'll hear that audio stop playing now. One thing I'll point out, because it took me a bit of time to figure this out, if you've got a Raspberry Pi 400 and you're running RiscOS, you will only get audio out of the second HDMI port. I was scratching my head for ages wondering why I couldn't get any sound out of the machine. Then I read it on a forum. You've got to use the HDMI port that's furthest away from the power connector. So just a little tip that might save you a bit of time. But as you can see here, you know, it's playing MP3 files just great, which obviously you expect from a modern machine. But, you know, on RiscOS back in the day, this would have been an impressive demo. As would playing video files as well. Now, they do include some movie trailers in here, so you can test out video playback on RiscOS. So hopefully, again, I won't get a copyright strike for these. These are only movie trailers. But again, only 480p, and the Raspberry Pi 400 can obviously do, you know, HD, no problem at all. I'm not sure on the video playback capabilities of RiscOS in terms of high definition, but, you know, this playback here looks really smooth, no drop frames or anything. And yeah, nice little user interface here. We can make it a bit more full screen by clicking that. So again, you know, you can watch all your media and everything in here. It's very nice to have included. There's also a CD player application bundled with RiscOS Direct. I haven't got a CD player attached to my machine, but if you had a USB CD drive, I imagine you could probably play your music CDs while you were doing your work in RiscOS. A sample editor included here as well. Now, I must admit, I'm not too up on music production. I used to try a bit in Pro Tracker on the Amiga back in the day, but I was never very good at it. But nice to have that included too. There is also an internet radio streamer here as well. So if you've got any of your shoutcast streams, that kind of thing, you should be able to stream them just fine. And there's actually a few, by the looks of it, that are already set up in here to play. And even though I've closed these programs, you'll see they are still running down the bottom here. So to quit them, we need to just double click on them and make sure we exit out of the programs to get back any RAM that they might be using, so we can come out of all those. The diversions folder contains a bunch of games in here. So it is quite cool to see stuff like ScumVM, which will let you play all of those old school LucasArts point and click adventure games. I used to love them back in the day. Loom, Monkey Island. Obviously none of them are installed out of the box, probably due to copyright reasons, but they are easy enough to find all over the web. So nice to have a port of that on here. Hopper, which I guess is a full screen application. This is quite cool, with some very 8-bit looking graphics. Yeah, I thought this would be just a Frogger clone. Not sure on the controls. There we go. How do I go up and down? Yeah, can't get him to move, but you get the idea. You've played Frogger before. So we'll press escape to get out of that. We also have a puzzle game on here. I remember this being in the original RISC OS, actually. Just got to rearrange them by, get the numbers in order. Robot arm. Wow, I always wanted a robot arm attached to my computer back then. And actually looking at this, it looks like it's more than just a simulator. Disconnected, maybe you can actually control a real robotic arm with this application by the looks of it, which, yeah, okay, that's just giving me an idea of a project that I want to do now. Very cool to have that included there. We also have Doom here as well, which is quite a surprising addition. By the looks of it, the original shareware version of Doom. And how does this run? Very nicely, actually. Yeah, nice high resolution graphics for Doom here. And yeah, really smooth, not dropping frames and everything. Very nice to have this included too. And I think with the version of Doom on here, if you've got, the WAD files from the full versions or any third-party Doom mods and stuff, you can run those in here as well. They just stick the shareware version in, to avoid any copyright problems. We all know what Doom looks like, but very nice to have that running on here. Yeah, I'll come out of that now, otherwise I'll be sitting in it for the next few hours. We have Minehunt, which, yeah, exactly what you thought would be Minesweeper. We do have a bunch of images included too that we can view with the image viewer. So if I double click that, a nice 3D rendered apple. This one that looks a bit like a directory tree of RISC OS. And yeah, nice drawing of an MG midget from 1978. And we have a more fully featured word processing program called Writer that actually, from the icon, looks very similar to the old Microsoft Word logo there. And again, this looks really nice. If you're used to those old versions of Word, this will be second nature. We also have a bunch of network applications included here as well. We've got Avalanche here, which looks like a VNC program. So if you want to remote control other machines or this one from another computer on your network, you could do that. We have an FTP program here as well. Always useful to have to transfer files from various FTP servers around the net. Omni, I'm not exactly sure what that is. I double-clicked it before. I remember that busy cursor. That looks the same. Oh, looks like a network manager. Okay, cool. We have, I imagine this is an email client. Yeah, I'm not sure how compatible this will be with, things like Gmail and Outlook. But you can put in your POP3 server there as well. Not sure if it supports IMAP. Might have to give that a little test later and give that a setup. Servers. We've got an HTTP server on here as well. So, yeah, if you want to host your website on a RISC OS, looks like it could be possible. And we have a couple of web browsers included too. Now, last time I demoed RISC OS, we were using NetSurf, which is included here as well. There is a browser I didn't use last time called Otter Browser, and from checking out some of the forums, they do recommend using Otter Browser as a more modern alternative to NetSurf. So we'll give it a quick try now and see how it handles websites. Okay, looks like it's there's a library I can't access here. We do have a lot of things running though, so I'm going to give the machine a quick reboot, and then hopefully we can launch that. So I'll middle click on the Raspberry Pi logo, click on shutdown. Yeah, it warns me that there is stuff in the RAM disk. That's fine though. Click on restart. And the reboot only took around 10 seconds. So not quite as quick as the old RISC OS machines that I used at school when everything was in ROM, but still a very decent boot time. So we'll put that back to 720p. And let's try Otter Browser again, which fingers crossed will work now. I think maybe something else. Yeah, this one's not working. Can't load a library that it needs. Okay, we might have to give that a miss in this demo then. Let's try NetSurf and see if that's changed much since the last time I test drived it. I do remember this being quite a speedy little web browser. So we'll have a look. RISC OS. Yeah, nice and responsive. You know, the page load speed there was pretty good. Click on there, see what the rendering's like. Yeah, we're checking out Wikipedia there. I'm also going to test out my podcast website as well, as we've got embedded media in here. Now, playing embedded media is often a problem for less well-supported web browsers. Yeah, and I'm looking here, it's actually all the rendering on the page is wrong. There's meant to be little widgets to play the media in here, but they're just coming up blank. So yeah, it doesn't look like that works. Let's quickly try as well, something that I'm almost certain is not going to work. But we'll test it out anyway. See what YouTube looks like on here. Now again, when you're using alternative operating systems, actually embedding YouTube videos in a web browser is quite a challenge for them. You know, it's quite a technical achievement for a web browser. And I know from using stuff like MorphOS and various others, Haiku, for example, you're actually playing YouTube videos in the browser is something that generally is not that easy to do on alternative operating systems. And as you can see here, yeah, it says it's loaded the page. We literally just have little black boxes where the videos are meant to be on YouTube's homepage. There may be a way around it. I know often you can get script programs that will pull the YouTube videos directly from YouTube's server and just play them in a window. So that might be something that's possible. So I'm not really surprised about that, but, you know, thought it'd be worth a quick test anyway. And if you want to get some additional programs installed on here as well, there are 2 different package managers included in RiscOS Direct. Now, the first one is Pacman. So if I double click on here, you will see that we've got a load of applications that are all point and click to install. You know, there's all sorts of stuff in here as well. We've got utilities, you know, we've got a BitTorrent client there. There are a bunch of games that are spotted then. Your platform games, MP3 audio editor that converts to WAV files, RiscOS font editor. So there are a load of applications. I imagine these probably date from all throughout RiscOS's history. So there might be some that go back to the 90s, some more modern ones as well. But, you know, having a package manager in here really makes it a simple way to track down programs that you might want to use. And again, installing them. So if I wanted that font program there, I imagine just a case of clicking that and there you go, install. And it will download it and install it for you, making it very, very simple. So we have Pacman, and there is another one included here as well, which is called Store. So if I go into the SD card, I think we can find it in here. There we go. The Pling Store, which is a separate repository for files with paid-for applications in here as well. So you look through here, I mean, again, we have a load of free stuff here, but there are some programs here that you can actually, you know, commercial packages that you can pay for, like this one here, ARM X6 TurboGrafx, it's, you know, $29.99. We have one here, Data Power 3, it is £100. And this one looks like it's one of the finest examples of RISC OS software. Looks like it's a database program, so looks very cool. I'm not going to pay £100 for a database program I'm not going to use for a video, but it is cool to see commercial applications still being available in here. I mean, I'm not sure when that was last updated. So give me any information on how new that is. We can see that it's version 3.16. Yeah, but I'm not sure whether, I mean, they've got a website there I imagine you could probably get more detail on, but I'm not sure whether it, you know, has been updated for 20 years or it's something that's still in active development. Bunch of other things in here as well that they're charging for. Did I spot, yeah, Doom Trilogy. Yeah, $14.99, and you can get a bunch of Doom games here as well that are enhanced for ARM 7 and 8. So yeah, cool to have a legal way to play and download Doom on here. And I mean, it is kind of a bit confusing, I guess, for new users having two separate package managers. But, you know, if you just learn that if you want to get commercial applications, you're going to get stuff from the Plink store. Very cool to have them included, though. And again, you know, saves you a lot of time looking around forums and websites and trying to track down applications to use on RiscOS. So that's a few of the things that you're going to find in RiscOS 2021, you know, the RiscOS Direct distribution that has a lot of this stuff installed out of the box. But again, all of these will work in the standard RiscOS, I imagine. It will just be a case of manually installing them. But I know my channel, you're interested in the retro stuff. So what we're going to do next is we're going to have a look at running old school BBC Micro and Acorn Archimedes games, applications, software in RiscOS Direct. Okay, now let's take a little trip back in time and check out some old school BBC Micro and Acorn Archimedes applications and games running inside RiscOS Direct. And again, you know, the guys have put so much work into this distribution and saved a lot of headache for you by including a bunch of programs and emulators to get those classic applications working in here. And actually, if you check out the YouTube channel Wi-Fi Sheep, they've actually got a really comprehensive tutorial in there that's about an hour long, actually, by I think it's a RiscOS Direct team that kind of takes you deep into all the operations of the operating system, how to configure all this stuff as well. So if you want something that's a bit more in depth to get things working and how to use RiscOS, I will link that up in the video description. Definitely worth a look. And as you can see here in the emulators directory, we have a few different folders containing different emulators, including a DOS PC one that, you know, we're not interested in here. But if I go to the Acorn 26-bit folder, you will see in here we have something called Acorn Mode that will actually boot into essentially a sandbox virtual machine of RiscOS 3. But also, if you look here, the Acorn drive, that is the storage that you'll be able to access within Acorn Mode. So again, I've got a few classic applications and games and disks that I've already put in here. One thing to be aware of is if you download games from the internet, you may need to change their file type to be able to use them as disks. As you can see here, we've got one that just says data on their SWIV. If I middle click on it, go to File, and then go down to Set Type, we need to change that to floppy. So I'll type that in, press Return, and as you can see now, it becomes a floppy disk icon. So one thing to be aware of when you're downloading things, often the file types get corrupted by, you know, hosting them on Linux web servers and that kind of thing. So now what we can do is we can boot into Acorn Mode, and it is RiscOS 3 from 1992, exactly as you remember it on the Acorn Archimedes. And if I click here on game disk, as you can see all this stuff here, the host FS, this is that directory I showed you before with all of the games and applications in there. And all the classic apps, some of which I demoed a moment ago, are in here that, you know, you would have got in ROM on the Acorn Archimedes back in the day. So it is, you know, quite nostalgic to see these original versions of them again. And that color palette, I forgot about that. Yeah, you can actually change the screen palette from here as well. And yeah, the old Acorn logo there. Again, you know, doesn't look much different considering there's been 30 years between the versions almost, but, you know, it's nice to see this original RiscOS theme again. But let's check out a few of the games on here. Now, there are two different ways of playing games. Some of them are games that actually are just double click and you can launch them, you know, hard disk installable games. Other ones are game disks that you'll need to mount the images. So first of all, we'll check out a few of the ones that they've actually bundled in here, including Pac-Mania. That was a very popular game on many platforms back in the day. And the version of Pac-Mania on the Acorn Archimedes was a really good one, actually. A lot of these games were ported by a company called Chrysalis back in the day, who would port Atari ST and Amiga games and arcade games over to the Acorn Archimedes. And I did an entire video recently showing some of the gaming capabilities of this platform that were often untapped at the time. You know, having an Amiga at home, I didn't realize that you could play arcade quality games really on the Acorn Archimedes, because, you know, really we just use them for education at school. So yeah, you've got a nice version of Pac-Mania running inside the emulator here, you know, very smooth scrolling, and it plays really nicely. And another Chrysalis port is Speedball. Now again, you know, big game on other platforms back then, and the Acorn Archimedes version of this, another really good port. Obviously the Bitmap Brothers, legends back in the day. And as you can see, it runs very quickly in this emulated Acorn mode on the Raspberry Pi, maybe a little bit too quickly. Looks a bit frantic, but again, you know, it's running really well. And if you're a fan of Speedball 2 back in the day, I mean, definitely one of the best sports sims of the 90s. You'll enjoy this. And of course, one of the most famous games that really feels at home on the Acorn platforms was Elite. And actually, you can download Elite for free for the Acorn Archimedes and the BBC Micro from David Braben's website these days as well. Now, I've got to admit, I was never clever enough to play Elite back in the day, so I'm not going to be the best person to demo this. I was a bit more into my platform and adventure games. These kind of space sims weren't really my thing, but generally, from what I know, the Acorn Archimedes version of it, which I'm failing to control at all here, is regarded as the best Elite version from back then. So if you're a fan of it, you'll definitely be at home playing this. However, I'm going to quit out of this game quite quickly because I've got no idea what I'm doing. And there is another way to launch games as well. Now, the ones I've demoed so far are hard disk installable, but you can see in this folder here in Games Disks, I've actually got some floppy disk images that we can mount by going into the Apps folder here. And then there is a program called ADFFS, which lets you mount disk images and use them as if they were actual floppies on the machine. So a demo that I'm sure most people remember who used the Acorn Archimedes back in the day. You just drag the ADF images and drop them onto the ADFFS icon in the icon bar here. And then we can open the game Lander. Now, this was a game by David Braben of Elite fame, and this was actually bundled with the RISC OS system disks. I remember at school playing this and being blown away by the incredible 3D graphics on this. It looked really advanced for the time. I was, again, like with Elite, I love David Braben's games, but I've always been crap at them. And actually, this was quite hard to control, I remember. I think this actually came out as a full game called Virus later on, but there was this demo here. It runs a lot quicker on here than it did on the A3000 back in the day, which actually makes it even harder to control than it was on the Acorn Archimedes. But again, you know, it's if you really want to test yourself, I guess you could give it a go at this ridiculous frame rate here. And again, we have another Chrysalis port of a game that was famous on other platforms. Obviously, the infamous Lemmings. Everyone loved this game back in the day. And it got quite a nice port to the Acorn Archimedes as well, which is, of course, playable in the Acorn mode here. And again, Lemmings is very similar on most platforms. It did have some nice music on the Acorn Archimedes version, though. And it is cool sometimes, you know, if you're used to playing these games on other platforms, sometimes it's interesting just to see kind of how the other half lived and, you know, what these games were like on alternative platforms back in the day. Another game that I used to love when I was a kid, this is one of my all-time favourite action-adventure games, The Amazing Flashback. Again, got a really nice port to the Acorn Archimedes with some extra frames of graphics as well compared to the version I used to play on the Amiga and Mega Drive back in the early 90s. And again, as you can see, you know, running really nicely here. And this game is a bit like what I imagine a bad acid trip would be like. Not that I've ever had a good or a bad acid trip in any way, shape or form, but this game, very bizarre. This is called Top Banana. And yeah, don't have nightmares. Now, you might be wondering if the Raspberry Pi 400 and the Acorn Archimedes were both ARM-based, you know, the same architecture. Why do we need to run that old software inside a emulated environment? Well, you can actually run Archimedes software directly in RISC OS by using the A emulator. Now, if you look in here, it's actually a little module that you can run that will allow 26-bit code to execute within 32-bit RISC OS. So if you install that module, as you can see, that's running there now, that should let me run the Acorn Archimedes software directly in here. So if I click on the README, it'll give me a bit more detail there. It tells you the platforms that are supported. Now, how well this is going to work, I'm not exactly sure, because I have read on some of the forums that really the safest way to do this is to do it in the emulated environment, because sometimes if you're running games and things that need access to hardware that's not implemented here, it can sometimes, you know, at best crash the system, at worst corrupt your operating system install, you know, by maybe overwriting modern files with older ones. So it's advised really, if you want to run stuff like games and demos, to do it in the older emulated environment rather than trying to execute it using something like this. So we've emulated the Acorn Archimedes. Obviously, I'm exploring what's in RiscOS Direct, and emulation is a big part of this. So we'll have a look at the other emulator that's included here, the Acorn 8-bit, which is the BBC Micro. Now, as you can see here, there is something called B-bit. So if I double-click that, you're going to see down here that an icon appears with the old Acorn BBC Micro OWL logo that they had on those machines back then. And what you can do is you can actually drag disk images and play them directly in here. So if I was just to click it, you'll see now we launch into the BBC Micro Basic. And then if I press F12 on the keyboard, now we can try out some software in here. Now, as before, when we were loading in the floppy images into the Acorn Archimedes environment, these files that you download, the SSD files, they will often need renaming the file type settings so they work in the BBC Micro emulator. So if we click on one here that actually has the file type set correctly, we can see what that should be. So that needs to be a DFS image. So we'll try here on Adventure, change the file type. And as you can see, that will now look like an old 5¼ inch floppy disk icon. And we can then just drag and drop it onto the icon here for the Model B. And if I can find the keys, we see there that now the disk image is loaded. Now, unfortunately, we can't do shift and break, which is the usual way that you would automatically load a BBC micro disk, as there is no break key on the keyboard, and I've tried various combinations. I can't get any way to get shift break working here, so you'll have to load the game disks manually by the looks of it. But I think if we do exec boot, yeah, that should then load the bootloader. As we can see here, that is working now. And I love this old school teletext mode on here. This looks really cool. A game that I definitely recognize from being a kid. One of my favorite games at school was the legendary Granny's Garden. Now, anyone that went to school in Britain back in the late 80s would have played this game. It was a real favorite of most kids back then. Now, to load this, I think we need to do chain, turn numlock off, Gran 1. It's been about 30 years since I did this, but yeah, that should get Granny's Garden loading up. Fingers crossed. There we go. Ready to start? Of course we are. And this game, if you're not familiar with it, it's actually quite hard to find online these days for the original BBC Micro, as the developers, I think they're called Formation, actually still stringently protect the copyright on this game. And there is a version that you can run on your modern PC, and I think there is one for iOS and Android as well that they sell for quite a low price, but trying to find the originals is quite hard, as they kind of meticulously take it down from all of the ROM image websites. So quite a hard image to find these days if you want the original BBC Micro version. And the witch in here, I think, is still the scariest enemy in video game history. So we've got a magic tree, press the space bar, and I think this was all random. Let's do 3B. I'll put the letter first, okay. B3. Not enough magic in that tree. Yeah, and I remember you had to find the magic tree for no apparent reason at all until you could get into the game. I'm sure this is a riveting video. What was the last one you try in here, isn't it? It's got to be C3. Oh no, there we go, it worked. Now we go into the, God, I remember this. This brings back memories. And this music as well. Of course, at school back in the day, I was actually, and I'm going to sound ridiculously cool now, I was the computer monitor. So yeah, I'd get in early, around 8:30 in the morning before the other kids, and actually take all of we had 4 BBC Micros in our school, and I'd set them up on the trolleys with the cub monitors and wheel them into the classes. The kids always looked excited when the BBC Micro came in, and we were going to play Granny's Garden though. Always the highlight of your school day. Okay, we're inside the secret cave now. The king and the queen of the mountains have been locked away in here by a wicked witch. Their 6 children have been taken away and hidden by the witch. Would you like to help them? Now, I do remember if you say no, because we all, obviously being, petulant kids, we'd always be like, well, no, of course we don't. That's not very nice. So it doesn't let you, you have to say yes. So we have to find the missing children. So we need to find Esther first of all, and the King's and Queen's pet raven is going to help me. See, these were mind-blowing graphics back in the 80s. Okay, we've got a magic raven. Do you want help? No. Okay. The King and Queen say, then he must help us, so why ask the question then? Let's go to the woodcutter's house. Okay. Right, so the witch has made the woodcutter leave his home, and now it's a prison for Esther. So I guess we've got to go there. Come on then, let's go. Oh. Yurd, you understood it. Yeah, why not? Let's go in. We must solve a little puzzle. Okay. Now maybe this was a bit easier to see on a CRT monitor. Looks like fig actually, doesn't it? There we go. We must be very careful. The witch has set some traps for us. Would you like to take an apple from the tree? Now, I've got a feeling she's going to get us if we do, but why not? Let's give it a go. I was a greedy kid. Oh, no. So I think as well, the witch kind of appears at different intervals in the game depending on the path that you take. It's kind of randomly generated. It's very dark, but you can see a long stick by the wall. Yeah, let's take the stick. I've got a stick and an apple. So we're doing well here. Okay. Let's go to... Should we go to the kitchen? Oh, no, line 880, okay. So I crashed the game before we even saw the witch. Okay, so we're back here again, after I went through all the start of the game too. Let's try an apple from the tree again. Okay, so here we are back here. Let's try going into the cupboard. And the game crashed again at exactly the same time. Now, if you haven't played this before and you want to see the witch, I'll put an image up of her now. You know, forget Resident Evil, forget Slender Man. Still the scariest video game character ever. I love the fact as well, she doesn't even kill you or eat you. She just sends you back home. Gave me nightmares as a kid, though. And just before we finish up with the BBC Micro stuff, I thought I'd quickly try out the first ever word processor that I used as a kid. This is a package called Folio. Now, I seriously haven't looked at this since about probably 1989 when I was in infant school. I remember loading this up, you know, the teacher had had this on a couple of the BBC Micros, and we'd do little essays and stories and print them out on the dot matrix printers. So yeah, this user interface is bringing back a lot of memories. I've actually tried to look for this online a few times over the years and look at some screenshots, but actually it seems quite hard to find. So I'm not sure how popular this was. So we can do like a different formats. Let's try doing a news one. So we press 2 on the keyboard. There we go. And now I guess this is going to be like a newspaper. Okay. Hello, I am writing the news. Yeah, this brings back some memories. That spacing as well. I love the fact that the cursor is kind of shaped like a fountain pen there. Yeah, very simplistic, but you know, being the first word processor I ever used as a kid, I was a big fan of Folio, so yeah, very cool. Nice. So yeah, that's been a look at BBC Micro emulation. As I mentioned, I'll probably do an actual full BBC Micro video and share a few more of my memories and old school programs that I used to use on that back in the day soon. But it is good to know that all of this is bundled with the RiscOS Direct distribution. So if you want to jump into Acorn Archimedes and BBC Micro emulation on your Raspberry Pi, a really easy way to do it. So that's been a look at RiscOS Direct. Now, we could go on further, you know, there's lots more in this distribution, but, you know, this video is probably already way too long. I've got to say, I think the team have done a really good job of pulling together a lot of the best RiscOS software that you'd use on a daily basis, and having those fully configured emulation environments as well, extremely useful, particularly for users who may have used RiscOS or the BBC Micro years ago and are kind of dipping their toe in the water again. That is a nice way to not only capture that nostalgia, but also kind of show you what's new in RiscOS as well, so they cover both sides of it quite well, I think. So if you've got a Raspberry Pi lying around, I mean, maybe you were a user of RISC OS at school like I was, back in the 80s or 90s. It is really good to kind of see where it's come in those like 30 years since its heyday and how the community are keeping it alive today. And I'm pleasantly surprised by the amount of software that is available in both of the package managers. And of course, even the existence of commercial software is pretty mind-blowing in 2021. But also the fact that it's now open source as well, and it has been for about 2 years now. It will be interesting to see where the community steers this project, and obviously having stuff like the direct distribution that we've got here is definitely a step in the right direction, I think. So definitely worth a download, even if you haven't used it before and you just want to try out an operating system that is really completely different to anything that you've probably tried before. It is worth it just for that, I think. So if you want to give it a download, I'll link it up in the video description. Thank you for watching this video. And a quick reminder that I do a weekly retro gaming and technology podcast. You can get new episodes every Friday on your favourite podcast client. Search for The Retro Hour, or you can get us on your smart speaker, ask it to play The Retro Hour podcast, or just head onto our website at theretrohour.com. And while you're here on YouTube, here are another couple of videos I think you might enjoy. I'll see you next time.